In the Song of Ice and Fire universe, Barristan Selmy is something of an icon, perhaps the last of the great, legendary Kingsguard members. Exiled by Joffrey in A Game of Thrones, Barristan makes a sudden reappearance in A Storm of Swords, where it turns out that he hid his identity in order to observe the exiled princess, Daenerys Targaryen. Barristan joins her entourage and stands by her side until the end of A Dance with Dragons, where he decides to eschew his previous passivity and, in defense of her, do something he never did before: smash the oppressive status quo. Barristan is by all means a likable side character, yet his perception in the fandom is strange to say the least. In spite of the drastic change in the outlook on life and decisive actions he takes to prove to the audience that he left said outlook behind, he is often treated as if he never once changed and is solely judged in the context of his past passivity, often accused of being a hypocrite even after he decisively changed his behavior, precisely the way he should have, and is explicitly seen regretting his past ways. Today, let's delve into the character of Barristan the Bold and discuss the strange place he occupies in the fandom. Before I start, remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. Barristan Selmy is a Westerosi knight. He received his knighthood from Aegon V Targaryen himself. He then participated in the War of the Nine Penny Kings, where he slew Maelys the First Blackfire, thus ending the Blackfire threat. These deeds caused him massive popularity in Westeros. Later in life, Barristan joined the Kingsguard under Jaehaerys II Targaryen. After his death, he continued to serve Aerys II Targaryen. During the Defiance of Duskendale, Aerys was imprisoned inside the town for half a year, and Barristan decided to sneak inside and save him before Tywin storms the city, fearing that if it happens, Aerys might be killed. Barristan succeeded, and as retaliation, Aerys destroyed houses of Darkton and Hollard, only sparing young Dantos after Barristan asked for it as a boon. Duskendale was when Aerys' madness set off for good. In later years of his life, witnessing Aerys' madness and cruelty, Barristan found it increasingly harder to keep his vows. He was present at the tourney at Harrenhal, where he was infatuated with Lady Ashara Dane. He wanted to name her his Queen of Love and Beauty upon winning the tourney, but was defeated by Rhaegar Targaryen, who crowned Lady Lyanna Stark, which Barristan bitterly regrets, since this started a chain of events that led to Robert's rebellion. Barristan fought on the Trident, where he was severely wounded. Robert, although his enemy, had his own maester tend to his wounds. When Barristan heard of the brutal deaths of Aegon and Rhaenys, and Robert allegedly smiling at their corpses, he thought that he would have killed him had he been present. Upon recuperating, Barristan wondered whether he should seek out Viserys, but decided against it, having received pardons from Robert and continued to serve in the Kingsguard. He did not approve of Jaime remaining in the Kingsguard. Barristan is probably introduced as the King's Court is travelling from Winterfell to King's Landing, with Ned Stark having accepted the position of a Hand. When Robert wants to send assassins to kill pregnant Daenerys, Ned and Barristan are the only ones to oppose this move. Barristan accompanies Robert at a royal hunt, where the king is mortally wounded by a boar. When his son Joffrey succeeds him, he dismisses him from the Kingsguard, citing his advanced age. In reality, Joffrey wants to give his position to Sandor Clegane, and for Jaime to be the new Lord Commander. Barristan throws down his sword and leaves the throne room. He manages to escape when gold cloaks try to apprehend him. Barristan disguises himself as a commoner and witnesses Ned's execution. Re-evaluating his years of service in Robert's Kingsguard, he admits that Robert had been a good knight but a poor king. Barristan decides that he must find his true king and die in his service. Tywin Lannister fears that Barristan may join Stannis or Robb. His son Tyrion has similar reservations. He is also eyed by Renly. Barristan, however, crosses the narrow sea to Pentos and comes into contact with Illyrio Mopatis, learning that Viserys died in Vaes Dothrak. Illyrio sends Barristan, disguised as an old squire Arstan Whitebird, to Carve to bring Dany back to Pentos. Barristan saves Dany from an assassination attempt and introduces himself as Arstan, having been sent to serve her by Illyrio. Though Arstan urges Dany to sail to Pentos, they instead make it to Astapor. Arstan still hides his identity and tells Dany a lot about her family and dragons. Jorah mistrusts him. Arstan is present with Daenerys when she is considering buying Unsullied, and he expresses his displeasure with slavery and Slaver's Bay at large several times. Arstan is also against Dany selling one of her dragons in exchange for an army, but she does not actually do that and actually starts an anti-slavery revolt. Then they move on, conquering Yunkai and Meereen. In front of the gates of Meereen, Dany is attacked and almost killed, but Barristan saves her again and reveals his true identity, explaining why he followed her to the other side of the world. It is then when Barristan tells Dany that her father was mad, and that Targaryens carry the tide of madness, but that Rhaegar did not have it, and that she does not have it either. Dany accepts him back and appoints him to her Queen's Guard, while Jorah, having spiteful Robert, is exiled. Barristan serves Dany in Meereen and tries to persuade her to go to Westeros in various ways. Barristan trains Dany's hostages in the arts of Western chivalry and trains some of the freedmen as knights. Barristan does not approve Dany's marriage to Hisdar and instead prefers that she marries Quentyn Martell. Dany, however, chooses Hisdar to keep the peace in Meereen. When Drogon begins attacking people in Daznak's Pit, Barristan tries to protect Daenerys. As she flies away, Barristan remains aimless in Meereen, hoping that she still lives. Skaha's Shavepate convinces Barristan that Hisdar tried to assassinate Daenerys, and he decides to take Hisdar hostage and break the peace in Meereen. Afterwards, he assumes the title of Hound, trying to manage the situation in Meereen and preparing for the upcoming battle. Once we get access to Barristan's POV after Dany's departure from Meereen, he is seen reflecting a lot on his life, having a lot of the same thoughts that fans have about the Kingsguard as an institution. We see it firsthand during Sansa's time in King's Landing, where Joffrey shamelessly orders his defenders to beat her and, on one occasion, even strip her in front of the entire court. The members of the Kingsguard cannot disobey their king, even if he orders them to beat and abuse innocent girls. We see similar thoughts in Jaime's POV, where he reminisces about his time serving the Mad King Aerys, witnessing him burning people alive as an execution method, as well as his brutal killings of Brandon and Rickard Stark. Jaime does snap out of it and kills Aerys when he wants to commit the biggest atrocity imaginable, destroying King's Landing with wildfire, with all inhabitants inside, for which he is reviled not only by the common people, but also by his fellow Kingsguard members, Barristan included. Something of an anti-parallel to this is Barristan, who grows to believe that saving Aerys from Duskendale was ultimately a mistake, that if he allowed Aerys to die there, Rhaegar would be crowned instead, and a whole lot of deaths would have been prevented. Barristan did what was expected of him as a member of the institution he serves, and it was impossible for him to know what Aerys would have become, and yet, the memory of his finest hour is also bitter. If Barristan had not had this sort of a reflection and instead continued reverencing the Kingsguard institution, then perhaps the accusation of his passivity and calling him a hypocrite would still ring true. But Barristan is seen reflecting on it and regretting standing idly for so many years, even wondering how much blood is on his hands for precisely this reason. It's another Kingsguard that kills Aerys, Jaime Lannister, and Barristan does seem to despise him, even though he killed the king that should be killed, and even though he himself wonders if he should have acted the way he did in Duskendale, thus indirectly leading to Aerys' death. This is most often used as proof of Barristan's hypocrisy, and to be honest, this is a bit hypocritical indeed. But Barristan also does not have a full picture of the situation, and to this day is unaware of the wildfire plot. So I'm inclined to agree that it is a bit hypocritical, but what I cannot agree with is that, upon comparison and contrast, Jaime comes across as the better character, the one who has a better understanding of the contradictions of the Kingsguard than Barristan, who still remains ignorant. I believe precisely the opposite. I think that Barristan ultimately did more to change his ways than Jaime. Ever since we gained access to his head in A Storm of Swords, a lot of people say that Jaime is undergoing a redemption arc. But I was always skeptical of that claim, and I don't really believe it, since Jaime is not doing anything to repent for his most heinous crime, trying to kill Bran. Barristan is not responsible for immoral deeds on that level, but he is no saint either. His crime is his passivity, and thus complicity in Aerys' crimes. And contrary to Jaime, he does something to repent for the morally questionable deeds he is responsible for. by choosing someone whom he perceives as worth following, as well as breaking the oppressive status quo of the peace in Meereen. Thus, in my humble opinion, Barristan has the character development Jaime is believed to be having. Yet, there are few people who make such claims, in part because Barristan is not amoral enough to be seen as needing redemption, and in part because of what we're circling back to. For some reason, people assume that Barristan, in spite of choosing to be an active character, is a static character, the same hypocrite he's been when he accepted Robert's pardon. This state of things is because the actions he takes are widely disapproved of by the fandom, not seen as truly valid, or that they do not count. This view is, for example, reinforced in the very famous The Meereen is Blood essays, according to which Barristan made a mistake by breaking the peace in Meereen, even though this is precisely the kind of thing he should have done previously in his life, disobeying the harmful status quo. But why is Barristan not given credit for it? The answer to this is, in fact, very simple. It's because of whom he chooses to serve. When Barristan is removed from the King's Guard and refuses to comply with Joffrey's order to settle down in some castle, Tyrion rightfully worries what it would mean for the Lannisters if Barristan chooses to publicly swear for Robb or Stannis, showing this as a real possibility. But Barristan chooses neither and instead crosses the narrow sea to back Viserys. Since he is already dead, Illyrio Mopatis sends him to Daenerys. He even manages to save Dany from assassins in the process, earning a place in her entourage. Yet instead of revealing himself immediately, Barristan assumes a false identity of Arstan Whitebird. That immediately causes Jorah Mormont to be suspicious of him, while Dany all but welcomes him with open arms. For much of A Storm of Swords, Barristan accompanies Dany in her various endeavors, until he reveals his identity, exposing Jorah as well. While Dany exiles Jorah, she forgives Barristan. It is then when Barristan reveals why he decided to hide his identity in the first place. Prince Viserys was only a boy. It would have been years before he was fit to rule, and, forgive me, my queen, but you asked for truth. Even as a child, your brother Viserys oft seemed to be his father's son, in ways that Rhaegar never did. His father's son? Dany frowned. What does that mean? The old knight did not blink. Your father is called the Mad King in Westeros. Has no one ever told you? Viserys did. The Mad King. The usurper called him that. The usurper and his dogs. The Mad King. It was a lie. Why ask for truth? Sir Barristan said softly. If you close your ears to it. He hesitated, then continued. I told you before that I used a false name so the Lannisters would not know that I'd join you. That was less than half of it, your grace. The truth is, I wanted to watch you for a time, before pledging you my sword. To make certain that you were not my father's daughter. If she was not her father's daughter, who was she? Mad, he finished. But I see no taint in you. Taint? Dany bristled. I am no maester to quote history at you, your grace. Swords have been my life, not books, but every child knows that the Targaryens have always danced too close to madness. Your father was not the first. King Jaehaerys once told me that madness and greatness are two sides of the same coin. Every time a new Targaryen is born, he said, the gods toss the coin in the air, and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. Jaehaerys, the old man knew my grandfather. The thought gave her pause. Most of what she knew of Westeros had come from her brother, and the rest from Ser Jorah. Ser Barristan would have forgotten more than the two of them had ever known. This man can tell me what I came from. So I am a coin in the hands of some god. Is this what you are saying, sir? No, Ser Barristan replied. You are the true-born heir of Westeros. To the end of my days, I shall remain your faithful knight, should you find me worthy to bear a sword again. There are several things worth discussing about this passage. We will start not with its contents itself, but with how grossly manipulated it is by the fandom. Because the Song of Ice and Fire books are so long and complex, it's very easy to mislead people either with made-up quotes or quotes that are taken out of context. This is precisely what happens with this passage, with people posting it to argue that Daenerys is intentionally closing her eyes to the truth by cutting it right before, why ask for truth if you close your ears to it? However, upon reading the entire passage, the opposite is true. Barristan is allowed to continue, and reveals the harsh truth that Aerys really was mad. Thus Dany is very much willing to ask for truth, and not close her ears to it. It is also rarely acknowledged that Dany's former ignorance with regard to Aerys was not a matter of her intentionally warping reality to suit her, but a matter of her source of information. Dany was born after the end of the rebellion, and all she knew of Westeros, including Aerys, came from Viserys, who himself was a little boy shielded by Rhaella. Most crucially though, Daenerys is not only willing to listen, at no point is Barristan afraid to speak. He does not fear punishment, because he established previously that Dany is someone who is willing to listen. Do you think I have forgotten how it felt to be afraid? Whitebird bowed his head. Your Grace, I did not mean to give offense. Only lies offend me, never honest counsel. Dany patted Arstan's spotted hand to reassure him. I have a dragon's temper, that's all. You must not let it frighten you. I shall try and remember. Whitebird smiled. It is worth noting that 15-year-old Dany is one of the few rulers in the series that are willing to listen to uncomfortable truths. Compare and contrast with 35-year-old Robert Baratheon. Ned had heard enough. You sent hired knights to kill a 14-year-old girl, and still quibble about honor. He pushed back his chair and stood. Do it yourself, Robert. The man who passes the sentence should swing the sword. Look her in the eyes before you kill her. See her tears. Hear her last words. You owe her that much at least. Gods, the king swore, the word exploding out of him, as if he could barely contain his fury. You mean it, damn you. He reached for the flagon of wine at his elbow, found it empty, and flung it away to shatter against the wall. I am out of wine and out of patience. Enough of this. Just have it done. I will not be part of murder, Robert. Do as you will, but do not ask me to fix my seal to it. For a moment Robert did not seem to understand what Ned was saying. Defiance was not a dish he tasted often. Slowly his face changed as comprehension came. His eyes narrowed, and a flush crept up his neck, past the velvet collar. He pointed an angry finger at Ned. You are the king's hand, Lord Stark. You will do as I command you, or I will find me a hand who will. I wish him every success. Ned unfastened the heavy clasp that clutched at the folds of his cloak, the ornate silver hand that was his badge of office. He laid it on the table in front of the king, saddened by the memory of the man who had pinned it on him, the friend he had loved. I thought you a better man than this, Robert. I thought we had made a nobler king. Robert's face was purple. Out, he croaked, choking on his rage. Out, damn you. I'm done with you. What are you waiting for? Go, run back to Winterfell, and make certain I never look on your face again, or I swear, I will have your head on a spike. In the passage of Barristan's confession, Daenerys is confronted not only with the truth about Aerys, but also with the fact that he was not the first, and that Targaryens carry the taint of madness, and that the chief reason as to why Barristan hid his identity was to observe her and make sure that she does not carry that taint. After spending a lot of time in her presence, he tells her plainly that he sees no taint in her. One could of course argue that not enough time passed and that he is unable to predict the future. Except, Barristan says that, in retrospect, the signs of what Aerys would become were always there. Surely, if Dany was just like him, he would be able to see the warning signs. Thus, from this passage, one should judge that Daenerys is the very opposite of Aerys, and that not only did Barristan judge her as not insane, he also decided to follow her because she is someone worth following. There is a second similar exchange happening shortly thereafter, right after Dany exiled Jorah. A knight of the King's Guard is in the King's presence day and night. For that reason, our vows require us to protect his secrets as we would his life. But your father's secrets, by rights, belong to you now, along with his throne, and I thought perhaps you might have questions for me. Questions? She had 100 questions, 1,000, 10,000. Why couldn't she think of one? Was my father truly mad? She blurted out. Why do I ask that? Viserys said this talk of madness was a ploy of the usurpers. Viserys was a child, and the queen sheltered him as much as she could. Your father always had a little madness in him, I now believe. Yet he was charming and generous as well, so his lapses were forgiven. His reign began with such promise. But as the years passed, the lapses grew more frequent until... Dany stopped him. Do I want to hear this now? Sir Barristan considered a moment. Perhaps not. Not now. Not now, she agreed. One day. One day you must tell me all. There is some good to be said of my father, surely. There is, your grace, of him and those who came before him. Your grandfather Jaehaerys and his brother, their father Aegon, your mother, and Rhaegar, him most of all. I wish I could have known him. Her voice was wistful. I wish he could have known you, the old knight said. When you are ready, I will tell you all. Then he kissed him on the cheek, and sent him on his way. This passage is manipulated in a similar way, for the same reasons. It's cut right after do I want to hear this now, to make it seem like, once more, Dany does not want to listen. Cutting quotes to fit a certain agenda is a common pattern here, as established many times before. Here additionally not only what follows is cut, but also context. She was just forced to re-evaluate her entire worldview, and exiled someone she considered a friend. She is obviously distraught, hence why she does not want to hear more now. However, very shortly afterwards, she herself basically demands that one day, Barristan must tell her the entire truth. One day you must tell me all. Must is a very strong word here. So, she is very much willing to hear the whole extent of Aerys' atrocities. And crucially, a lot of people want Barristan to die or abandon her before he has a chance to do that, so that she remains ignorant, and as such, it will be easier to argue that she is destined to go down a similar path as Aerys, since she does not have those warnings. But, after this conversation, she is frequently seen reflecting on the Targaryen madness anyway. So, that does not work either. This is crucial because Dany is often presented as the opposite, as someone who is delusional and the very opposite of self-aware, who shields herself from the truth and only listens to what she wants to hear. Cutting aforementioned quotes in the middle serves to reinforce this belief, but the actual passage proves the very opposite. Another important thing revealed here is that, having followed Dany in secrecy, Barristan decides on his own volition to join her and follow her, thus judging her as someone who is worth his sword. Someone he chose himself, rather than someone he reluctantly has to follow because he is bound by duty, feudal contract, or custom. This proves that Dany is someone worth following, in spite of the entire fandom making it seem like she is not. There is a third positive truth revealed in this conversation concerning other members of Dany's family. When Dany asks if there was something positive about Aerys, Barristan mentions Rhaegar on his own volition, calling him someone of whom there were a lot of positive things to say. We will discuss Rhaegar later, and as of now, let's put a pin on it. The insistence on manipulating these quotes is there to further one agenda only: that ultimately, Barristan misjudged Dany. The quote manipulation is a pretty crude trick, and won't work for everyone. Yet even those who know the full quotes are not convinced by Barristan's words. In fact, sometimes people act like his words about Daenerys are proof of his foolishness or even naivety. That is because, if the readers have a preconceived belief that Daenerys is a foregone conclusion because she is exactly like Aerys if not worse, then that necessarily entails completely disregarding this entire exchange, rendering Barristan's judgment null and void. There is another reason why Barristan's judgment has to be rendered null and void. A common talking point used by Daenerys' critics is that, since there is no other POV around her, we only see her own unreliable perception of herself. That she might only present herself as a hero, but that the reality may be much different, and we can't know, since we are solely in her head. Like many arguments used by those critics, it does not hold water. Barristan Selmy smashes this talking point like he smashed the piece in Meereen already in A Storm of Swords, unless we somehow claim that Dany hallucinated these two conversations, and that she coerced him into following him off screen to fool us. I have no doubt that there are people who claim things like that, but no sane person would actually believe in it. Still, even though these A Storm of Swords conversations definitely happened, the claims of unreliability persist. As if to drive one final nail to the coffin of Dany's supposed unreliability, Barristan becomes a POV character in A Dance with Dragons. I bet that once first-time readers of A Dance with Dragons heard that Barry is going to be a POV, they waited anxiously for his chapters, sure that reading them would have revealed just how truly awful and horrible Dany is, how much she is like Aerys, and how much he regrets following her. And then boom, it does not happen, and Barristan thinks of Dany in an exceedingly positive manner. I am the Queen's man still. Today, tomorrow, always, until my last breath, or hers. Barristan Selmy refused to believe that Daenerys Targaryen was dead. And now Daenerys, his bright shining child queen. She is not dead. I will not believe it. These are words of someone who is loyal to his liege, not out of duty, but out of genuine love and devotion, saying that he is going to be her man until the end of his or her days, like he confirmed in A Song of Swords, calling her endearingly his bright shining child queen, like a grandfather would call his granddaughter, and refusing to believe that she is dead, nailing the coffin to any claims that she is just like Aerys and destined to go mad. The only criticism he has for her is that she lets her feelings for Dario get in the way of her judgment. He also falsely believes that she rejected Quentyn because he's not handsome or fiery, and not because she already agreed to marry Hisdar. So yeah, he is indeed unreliable, just not in the way people assume. Other than that, Barristan clearly loves Dany and is endlessly devoted to her, because she proved herself worthy of that devotion. Upon being met with those statements and perceptions that Barristan has about Daenerys, rather than re-evaluate what they used to think about her, fans doubled down on claims that Daenerys is bound to end up exactly like Aerys, if not worse. In fact, it was perhaps in A Dance with Dragons, a book that introduces Barristan's POV, that seemed to solidify and amplify the beliefs held by large portions of the fandom ever since Daenerys was sold and raped at 13. That she is a villain in the making, and that her downfall is only a matter of time, because she committed the sin of being a daughter of a madman. And that necessarily entailed assuming that Barristan himself is unreliable, that he misjudged Dany, that he is still wrong, that the choices he made for Daenerys, like breaking the peace in Meereen, were wrong, that him even choosing to follow her is wrong. Thus, people act like he never truly reflected on himself, that he never had that mini redemption arc, that he is the same Barristan we meet in A Game of Thrones. Him breaking the peace in Meereen is seen as a wrong move because Daenerys choosing to break the peace in Meereen is seen as a necessary prerequisite of her becoming like Aerys, of the beginning of her Mad Queen arc. Per many predictions, the moment she returns from the Dothraki Sea, Barristan will see for himself that he made a wrong move, and thus, rather than a vindication, a decisive move made by someone who regretted his past passivity will be his biggest mistake. His arc, his mini-redemption arc, is thus invalid and incomplete, false, and he never learned anything, never changed. Hence, it's perfectly acceptable to judge him solely by his past. These readings of his character are supported by popular essays, such as The Meereen is Blood. And while The Meereen is Blood does not make any mention of Mad Queen Dany or Dany burning King's Landing, it does hint towards those theories at the very least. So, Barristan judging Daenerys worthy of being his liege is null and void. Yet Barristan's acknowledgement is considered something very valuable when Daenerys is not involved, and fans want to rob her out of it. A few years ago, after one of the Winds updates, a theory by a certain big-name fan appeared. From this update, he proposed a prediction that, in the Winds of Winter, upon hearing of Aegon Targaryen's, son of Rhaegar's, miraculous survival, Barristan will defect from Daenerys' side and join his cause. This, alongside Barristan's death in the Battle of Meereen, is the most popular predicted trajectory for him, and one that is emblematic of the absolute misunderstanding of this character, stemming from all the things I discussed previously. Once more, Barristan could have freely gone to Robb or Stannis, yet he took effort to cross the sea and reach Daenerys, and beforehand, he hid his identity to observe her, pledging his sword only when he made sure that she was worth it. Thus, his choice of Dany is not because he believes her to be next in line, but because he believes in her. Not her claim, but her as a person. Thus, to argue that Barristan will drop everything and rush to Aegon is absurd, for multiple reasons. For one, everyone has doubts about Aegon's legitimacy, and Barristan has no way to confirm whether he is the real deal when he happens to be half the world away from him. Assuming, however, that he, for some reason, does not have such doubts, would the best possible course of action not be urging Daenerys to join forces with her nephew, via marriage, especially now that Hisdar is out of the picture? If we disregard all of that, and Barristan manages to escape and make it to Aegon, does he repeat his Arstan Whitebear maneuver to confirm whether Aegon is worthy of his sword and whether he carries detained? Remember, he may be Rhaegar's son, but he is Aerys' grandson, and Barristan believes that anyone can fall victim to detained. What happens if he concludes that Aegon carries detained? Especially since another character describes him as Targaryen after all, clearly to reference the same thing Barristan is worried about. What does he do then? None of these theories ever ask these questions, because its authors have a preconceived view of Daenerys, while they do not have those about Aegon. In fact, the very same people who believe in Barristan Turncloak theories consider Aegon the best thing since sliced bread, who will be loved and adored by every single person on the continent, while they believe Daenerys to be already worse than Aerys. Thus, there is no need for Barristan to ever verify anything, to worry about the taint or whether Aegon is even a real deal. He assumes the belief of the audience whenever convenient. All of a sudden, he's not a hypocrite. In fact, his validation is an important step in Aegon's legitimacy. Him choosing Aegon may even be seen as fixing the mistake of ever choosing and following Dany in the first place. Admittedly, a lot of these theories don't go nearly as far as to the point of Barristan actually reaching Aegon. A lot of them simply assume that the moment Dany returns to Meereen, having chosen fire and blood on the Dothraki Sea, which according to a lot of people is the beginning of her Mad Queen arc, Barristan sees that he's made a mistake by ever following her and tries to sneak out, but Dany finds out about it in time and executes him on spot. Some people say that the vision of the House of the Undying that Dany has in A Clash of Kings, of a man being dragged behind a horse, is Barristan, and how shall she punish him once that happens. In fact, the vision of a man being dragged behind a horse is something that has already happened. It's the man who tried to poison Dany in Vaes Dothrak. So, people want Barristan to join Aegon in order to have an important character serving him, as a symbol of legitimacy and his fitness for ruling, and expect Barristan to deliver those vindications solely because there's Rhaegar's son on the horizon. But Barristan choosing Daenerys not because of some feudal contract or duties, but because he chose her, does not bring the same legitimacy, does not mean that Daenerys is fit to rule after all. This is a very strange double thing that does explain why Barristan is judged for things he is explicitly seen regretting and trying to change and maybe even redeem himself from. All of this is a wider pattern that I spoke of in my previous videos, because Daenerys is the only character judged by the assumptions of the trajectory of her future self that have not yet happened and were never confirmed to be happening, which include her committing the worst atrocity in the in-universe history. Thus Barristan cannot be vindicated in his choice of her. The lengths the author goes to show via Barristan that Daenerys is worthy of being followed are disregarded, but merely learning of Aegon's existence would be enough for Barristan to rush to him and validate his existence. All because she is already assumed to be a wrong choice, because she is already assumed to be mad and evil, even though everyone and everything screams the opposite. You may of course rush into the comments and yell that I'm wrong and made it all up. Well, I did not. I searched Barristan on asoiaf, and all of the most upvoted posts confirmed my previous suspicions. Now I intend to show you that this line of thought is very much persistent, and it's not something I just made up. For the sake of clarity, I shortened them when possible.
Title: Let's talk about Barristan the Bold. I've got a problem. Barristan is one of my favorite characters. He is also one of the most honorable characters we have. And here is where my problem begins. Barristan is almost predictable because of how bound he is to his vows, duty, and honor. After Joff dismisses him, he decides that taking Robert's pardon had been a mistake. Personally, I agree. So, he then sets out to find the rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, Viserys then Daenerys, and continue his role this time in the rightful Kingsguard, or Queensguard so it may be. So I ask you, what is Barristan the Bold going to do when he meets young Aegon, who has a better claim than Daenerys, as the Targaryen's only direct male descendant, heiress through Rhaegar? I know the Blackfire thing, let's ignore that for the moment. Here is where I start to worry. Puts on tinfoil hat. According to Connington, who fought with Barristan at Battle of the Bells, Aegon looks very much like Rhaegar, and we know Barristan held the last dragon in very high regard. Because of this connection, I feel Barristan the Bold's loyalty is questionable at best, and with Connington's help it is feasible that Aegon could win him away from Daenerys. Still ignoring the Blackfire thing, Aegon hasn't been revealed as a Blackfire yet. If Barristan feels honor-bound to switch sides and defend Aegon over Daenerys, possibly from Daenerys, maybe even helping Aegon defeat Danyala the Kingmaker, then Barristan would have to be counted as one of Dany's 3 betrayers. I think the betrayer for blood. This is all assuming Aegon is a Targ, or not.
This post has all the wrong assumptions that I spoke of. That Barristan would simply abandon Daenerys the moment he hears of Aegon's existence. In this scenario, he does not even do anything to verify whether this is a pretender, since the poster keeps telling us, forget about the Blackfire thing. Even though verifying whether he is a pretender would be very high on his list of priorities. Barristan does not know about the baby swap situation. He does not scroll through Reddit in his spare time and read elaborate theories about how somehow it was possible to do this maneuver either. even though it only makes sense retroactively. As far as Barristan is concerned, his most immediate assumption should be precisely that this is a pretender, and he is intelligent enough for his mind to go towards backfires as well, since he was the one who killed the last male one. There is also the wrong assumption that Barristan is all about serving the person who has the best claim. If that was the case, why didn't he go to Stannis and instead made the effort to cross the sea? Tyrion even says that Barristan could have gone to Robb of all people, and Renly also wanted Barristan to back him up. The matter of who has a better claim between Aegon and Daenerys is also not set in stone solely because Aegon is a male. Since the Word of Ice and Fire reveals that after Rhaegar died, rather than to make Aegon next in line, Viserys was Aerys' new heir, and in A Game of Thrones, Daenerys is referred to as Princess of Dragonstone, as his heir, and every single heir to the throne held the title of Prince or Princess of Dragonstone. Thus, Rhaegar's line was disinherited. And even if somehow Barristan disregards that, and even if somehow he believes that Aegon is real and not a pretender, why not try to think of how to, maybe fit Daenerys into this entire plan? Because Aegon and Daenerys, as of now, do not have reasons to be enemies. Quite the opposite. Dany even thinks that if Aegon lived, they would be close in age and perhaps they would get married for that reason. This line is a bit too specific to lead exactly nowhere. But there is of course that very popular prediction about how Daenerys' mind will legit explode the moment she hears about Aegon, and will drop everything just to run and kill him because she is the only one that's allowed the throne, even though she would probably do somersaults when she learned of the survival of her beloved brother's son. But for the poster, it's very much an either-or situation. But this post is praised as a genuine speculation, and while it does disregard Barristan's motivations for following Dany, it does not do so as harshly as another one I'm about to bring up, also highly upvoted.
Title: I don't like Barristan Selmy. Firstly, I don't deny he has many bodice moments, and is an unquestionably peerless swordsman and knight, but there are things about him I think are questionable. He stands idly by while Rickard Stark is being burnt alive, in his armor, while his son and heir Brandon Stark is being strangled to death in his attempts to save his father. He recalls that had Robert smiled at Rhaegar's slain children he'd have killed him on the spot, and no one could possibly have stopped him. He decides to join Daenerys' Queensguard, having been relieved of his duty by Joffrey, whom he would have served had he not, thinking that the daughter of a crazy and tyrannical king, who is on the brink being several books worth, of invading Westeros with a party of slaves, exiled Seswards, dragons, rapists and pillagers, Dothraki or Ironborn, take your pick. So it's okay for one king to seriously brutally murder a Lord Paramount and his heir in the most horrific manner while and stand aside, because serving his king is his duty. But if another king showed the slightest content at the tyrannical king's dynastic line having ended, he would not have duly served him, as was his duty, but became a kingslayer just like Jaime Lannister, whom he personally loathed. I feel his arc is the reverse of Jaime Lannister, loved to loathed. Maybe his only redeeming moment from here might be to see his folly in backing Daenerys for the throne and seeing the impending death and destruction not seen since the Fields of Fire, during Aegon's invasion, and become a queenslayer.
Helps that the poster did bring Jaime up by the end of the post, since I can elaborate on Jaime and Barristan even more. Guess what? Jaime also stood idly. And he did not react to Aerys doing anything then. He did not kill Aerys when Brandon and Rickard were being killed, because he did not care about them. He only killed Aerys when he was pushed over the edge and was about to commit an unspeakable atrocity. Jaime is seen regretting standing idly, as Brandon and Rickard were being killed. Barristan is seen regretting this as well. It's at the very least implied. The way Jaime frees himself of the guilt of witnessing Aerys' atrocities is to kill him, and the way Barristan frees himself of the guilt of witnessing Aerys' atrocities is to never once find himself in that situation ever again. Hence he breaks the peace in Meereen. Which one of those bears more weight as far as character development is concerned? Because both Jaime and Barristan remain in Kingsguard after Jaime kills Aerys and takes Robert's pardons, but after that happens, Jaime becomes an even worse person and Barristan stays more or less the same until something happens that snaps him out of it and he decides to seek someone worth following. Then Barristan finds himself once more serving a king who does not deserve it, guarding an oppressive status quo of the peace in Meereen and Slaver's Bay more broadly. The fandom's reaction? It was a mistake, and he should have stood idly and not break the peace. So, what do you guys want him to do at this point? What should Barristan have done in order to have the change be acknowledged in the audience's eyes? From now, let's move away from point number 2. We will talk about it briefly in a while, because point 3 directly relates to point 1 and is emblematic of what I spoke of. Barristan's development and actions are not acknowledged because it's Daenerys he serves. At this point, I'm convinced that Barristan could have single-handedly smashed slavery in all of Essos, personally killed all of the others, abolished feudalism and achieved world peace, and it still wouldn't have been enough so long as he does this as a member of Team Daenerys. This entire paragraph screams that the actions he takes after being dismissed by Joffrey do not count, because he chose wrong. All of the painstaking setup to show that this is Barristan's redemption. Choosing someone he personally picked after observing them is disregarded, because even if everyone around the known world of Planetos would be singing praises to Dany, Barristan's choice of her would never, ever, under any circumstances, be seen as a vindication of his character, because it's too deeply ingrained into the fandom's collective consciousness that she is secretly, inherently, interestingly rotten, and of course that she is a foregone conclusion. Thus, Barristan has not changed. He would be perhaps considered a changed man if he chose anyone else. Anyone who is not considered a foregone conclusion, about whom there exists no such assumption, and this is most often Aegon, even though he is the one called Targaryen after all. As of now, no Ironborn follow Dany, no slaves follow her either, and news of her freeing slaves do reach Westeros, hence nobody would have reasons to believe that Dany is leading a slave army, precisely the opposite. Also, notice the subtle racism and Orientalism here with regards to Dothraki. If Barristan chose Stannis, Robb, or even defected to Aegon, he would also follow a man who has an army of pillagers and rapists, since every army in the world is guilty of those crimes. And yet Dothraki are singled out, and they are always singled out as the only ones engaging in those crimes somehow, even though we see with our very own eyes the pillaging done by Westerosi armies. And it's disregarded that Dany personally takes action to prevent her armies from doing that, as well as punish them for engaging in those acts, even when she is merely a bridal slave with no power on her own. She does that and continues to punish rapists well into her campaign. But since Dothraki are written in such a one-dimensional manner, and they are not white, her followers are singled out as uniquely barbaric, while no such condemnations happen to white Northmen following Robb. So, why does this poster believe that Barristan's choice of Dany is not only invalid in the context of his character growth, but also condemnable? Well, does the question not answer itself? Because he or she believes that she is rotten to the core and on the straight path to becoming like Aerys, hence there is this little daughter of a tyrannical madman sprinkled in. Not only does this completely ignore that Barristan did not just randomly pick Daenerys because she was the nearest possible option without thinking what that entails, but took a lot of effort to see her for himself and observe her before he decides to join and judge her worthy of his sword, and specifically says that she is not his father's daughter. It's spelled outright in the book that she is not like him and does not have the taint, and yet she is the madman's daughter anyway. Lastly, I have no earthly idea why Barristan wanting to kill Robert if he saw him smile over the corpses of Aegon and Rhaenys would be something questionable at all. Did Robert have the right to allegedly smile upon seeing their mutilated corpses? Did he have the right to say that he sees no children, only dragon spawn? Rhaenys and Aegon were not just some kids, they were children of Rhaegar, and Rhaegar was Barristan's friend. How would you guys react if your friend's children were brutally murdered and you saw someone smile at their corpses or say that they deserve to die because of who was their father? Because I would probably tear them apart on the spot. But Phoenix, who would listen to those morons on Reddit, right? Well, you see, the reason why I chose to make this video was not because of Reddit, but actually because of a Tumblr post that my friend showed me. This post irritated me enough that I actually went to search for it and decided to respond. And I don't remember what I said, because the original poster deleted my comments in spite of swearing they didn't do it. Post reads as follows.
I love Barristan Selmy has so Nightbuild-like each pop chapter he gets kind of close to getting it and coming to terms with the violence he was complicit in as Kingsguard to past kings and then. He snatches his hand away from the hot stovetop of accepting and goes, well, better go teach these boys. To not break the cycle with Melag, of course, has never going to tell Dany about Aerys assaulting her mother and burning people alive, and Rhaegar kidnapping a teenager and being responsible for the chaos and death of her House of Oaths of Knighthood and the Oaths of the Kingsguard are not compatible. When the king you swear to us that upholding the idealized vision of kinghood.
Tumblr and Reddit are very different places when it comes to a Song of Ice and Fire analysis, and yet, the exact same sentiment is expressed here. It was when I saw this post and when I started doing my Myrini's Blood response, specifically the part about Barristan and Skahas, that something clicked in my mind and I realized that these people all believe in the same thing and for the same exact reason, but maybe express it differently and use different justifications. Tumblr people are also better in hiding what they truly mean. I bet that this person claims to love Dany and would never go on the level of Redditors who say that she is mad and delusional because she killed slavers, but the underlying rhetoric and its conclusion is the exact same. That Dany is being lied to by her advisors, that Barristan's judgment of Dany is wrong. Hence, she is being lied to by her advisors. Therefore, they cannot be trusted in their judgment of her. Therefore, it does not matter that she is judged so positively. Therefore, it can be disregarded, and Mad Queen Dany is imminent. First of all, Barristan does not come close to coming to terms with the violence he was complicit in. He fully acknowledges it, and this is why he chooses Daenerys in the first place. Calling someone you follow your bright shining child queen are not the words of someone who picked their liege based on who has the best claim for the throne. These are the words of someone who has genuine love and devotion for that person. And because he realized what he's been doing, he decided that, for the sake of Daenerys, he will even play the Game of Thrones, the one he resents, yet has no choice but to participate in. For her and her alone, he smashes the peace in Meereen, even though at first he thinks he has no right to. And for her and her alone, he refuses to stand idly once he learns that the plan was always to enslave everyone back. But of course, that was a mistake, or did not happen at all apparently. Then we have the part about how Barristan will not tell Dany about Aerys assaulting her mother and burning people alive. Again, this might not be as crude as cutting quotes out of context to make it seem like Dany closed her eyes to the truth and never opened them, but it does still ignore the exchange where Grant worked for that reveal and Daenerys saying that one day Barristan must tell her everything. So why is the original poster so sure that he's never going to tell her and continue to withhold the truth about Aerys burning people alive if both of them express willingness to have that conversation one day, just not the day where she is especially distraught? Unless Barristan dies before it happens, but if that were the assumption by the OP, it would not be written the way it is written. Besides, even Barristan partially revealing the truth causes Dany to question herself and her sanity, so why does OP act like she's still completely in the dark? And Dany says, one day you must tell me all, so presumably Aerys' assaults on Rhaella as well, but I have one question. Is it absolutely imperative for Barristan to tell her that as well? Would Dany be destined to fall into delusion if she does not also hear that her father raped her mother and that she was born out of rape? Is it absolutely necessary to add this detail to her overall misery? If Barristan gets a chance to do it, one day he will tell her the full extent of the truth. So why does OP so boldly say that of course he will never do it? Why, if both express the willingness to, respectively, listen and speak, and part of the truth has already been revealed? Now, remember the pin on Rhaegar. Let's go back to it right now, since that pin is here for a very important reason. Because invoking Rhaegar's name is always a very easy way to get your point across, since he is believed by the fandom to be either a massive idiot or the worst character in this story, on par with the evils such as Ramsay and Tywin. Barristan is a key character in recollections of Rhaegar. It is from him that we learn a lot of his backstory, and Barristan has nothing but an exceedingly positive opinion on the man. This, of course, is used to claim that Barristan is simply biased in favor of Rhaegar and did not realize that the man was rotten deep inside. Sounds familiar? Since he abandoned his poor Italian wife at the mercy of his madman of a father for the sake of a betrothed teenager, but he also manipulated said teenager into being a womb for his third head and also single-handedly brought the ruin of his house, up to and including the murders of his children. In any case, Barristan's recollection of Rhaegar could hypothetically be considered biased indeed if he was the only person to express such beliefs about him. But he is not the only one, quite the opposite. The opinion Barristan expresses about Rhaegar are what most characters who knew him express, and even the people who should hypothetically hold some sort of resentment towards him, like Ned Stark, speak neutrally of him. The only person to speak of Rhaegar very negatively is Robert. He is also the only one to regularly express his belief that Rhaegar kidnapped and raped Lyanna. Which is doubly strange considering that at some point Ned thinks that Rhaegar does not strike him as someone who frequented brothels. Would such a character randomly kidnap a highborn lady just to shag her? Going back to Barristan, he does not seem to think that the matter was a kidnapping. He thinks that Prince Rhaegar loved his lady Lyanna and thousands died for it. Nor does he make a comment about the fact that Lyanna was a teenager, because in Westeros, nobody, including him, has the same moral standards as graduates of Tumblr University. So let's for the sake of argument accept the premise that he is biased on Rhaegar and did not realize that Lyanna was kidnapped against her will. In that case, why the hell would he present it as Rhaegar kidnapping a teenager to Daenerys? This isn't what he believes in, so why? Several times Dany thinks of Rhaegar and the woman he loved, meaning Lyanna of course, and at some point even thinks that she wishes Dario carried her off like Rhaegar carried off his northern girl. Now I think that to carry off does entail kidnapping to some degree. So she does seem to believe that some sort of a force was involved anyway. Thus she is aware, so Barristan is not withholding any truth from her in that case either. Now a cherry on top, the tax.
Jaime cracked that code pretty quickly. Sander did too, but for different reasons.
So Jaime cracked the code by killing Aerys but never leaving the institution of Kingsguard afterwards and becoming an even worse person afterwards. But Barristan did not crack the code by breaking the peace in Meereen. Right, because fandom told me that breaking the peace was a bad move, so it does not count. Right, because it would never matter. Nothing that Barristan would have done to redeem himself from his previous complicity would be accepted by the fandom at large so long as it is done for Daenerys or under Daenerys. If Dany is indeed like Aerys, then that means that Barristan indeed did not change. There was no development whatsoever. He is too stupid to see a mad Targaryen right in front of him, and the fact that he is presented as lying to her about the truth of her father and a brother is just yet another proof of it. Can this be any more obvious? These people do not dislike Barristan because of his passivity earlier in life. These people do not treat him as a static character who never tried to change because this is what he is. They hate him because he serves Daenerys. That's literally it. If they hated him for his passivity earlier in life, they wouldn't have resented him for breaking the peace in Meereen and spent a lot of time arguing that he had no right to do that, or they would not outright ignore it. If they hated him for his passivity earlier in life, they wouldn't have insisted that he is still passive and hasn't learned anything, in spite of the evidence to the contrary. With Barristan, you see that the misinterpretation of Daenerys is not just a matter of misinterpreting her. Every single person in her storyline, or even connected to her in some way, is a subject of that misinterpretation, and often outright character assassination. Thanks for watching. Remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video.